Hi, I'm Lenny Waronker. We're in Venice, California, and I was a record executive and a record producer. I started my career as a record maker. Actually, it was a publishing company that was owned by my father, and it was a great experience working for that publishing company. It was called Metric Music, because in those days, songs were the most important element of a record. And I think they still are, for that matter. But you had to learn how to make the demos of those songs really sound like records, for fear that the producers in those days would mess up the song or the arrangement. So it was a great way to learn how to make a record with limited funds, really limited funds, focus in on the songs, and the most important parts of the song, and learn what it meant to take advantage of moments within a song. So it was a great sort of beginning to producing records. Great way of doing it. And again, it was way back in the early 60s, so in terms of technology, it was limited and difficult, but you had to use your imagination. Well, what happened is the demos were received very well by the record producers at the other record companies. They liked the quality of the demos, and especially at Warner Brothers and Reprise. The two heads of A&R were so impressed by the demos that they needed to hire sort of an A&R gopher, and they wanted to hire me. And I thought it would be a good thing to sort of move away from Liberty Records, my father, and go work at another record company. So I accepted the job. I wasn't sure I wanted to be a true record producer because, I knew how difficult it was. But the idea of moving there and being on my own made sense at the time. So I went off and did that. And what was nice is I had two executives who had made records for many, many years, who were very patient with me, and also who sort of pushed me in the swimming pool. They weren't overly hands-on. They wanted me to learn the hard way. And I'd picked up so much stuff beforehand working for the publishing company that it wasn't too bad. It was scary, but not that scary. So if I had a project, they just say, go hire an arranger and do it the way you want to do it. And you learn real quick when you have that kind of pressure on you. And in those days, it was so much different. It was really, again, about the song and being an artist, and often the artist didn't write songs, so you'd have to cast the voice with the song and have an arrangement and try to get 3 or 4 things in one night, which would be 3 hours. So again, the limitations were important, and I think helpful later on. I found an engineer who I could trust. I never really got involved in the technical part of making records. I never felt capable of doing it. I worked with somebody who I thought was amazing. His name was Lee Hirschberg. And I didn't want to. I didn't want to have to think about that. I mean, yes, I was concerned about how a snare drum sounded and how certain things were mic'd, but not obsessively. I had friends who were producers who understood it better than I did and were much more on the case when it came to that. But to me, it was always about the arrangement, the song, the performance. I don't have enough of a musical background to actually arrange. I'd have ideas, thoughts, references, because we all listen. We all had our favorite music, and we'd all have things we want to steal from. I mean, that still exists, and it's part of the game. But the real goal was to find a sort of familiar family of musicians and get them to work together and try to set up an environment that was creative and fun, and out of that, when people were open and free, you could get some amazing things done. It took a while to learn that. It was a sort of a hands-off approach, but finally it made sense to me that I always wanted to surround myself with people that were better, that were musicians and who knew more about it than I did. I think the business, because of all the changes that have occurred and consolidations. We have 4 or 5 major labels, or 4, whatever we have. And that's pretty much what it was like 30 years ago, or 40 years ago, or 50 years ago when all these independents cropped up. Because there were only so many slots, I guess. And a major label thought differently than Sam Phillips, for instance, at Sun Records, who had a vision, and went about doing it in his way, at his tempo, and out of that came Elvis Presley and Jerry Lee Lewis and Johnny Cash and tons of others. But it was done with a passion and a sense that he was breaking new ground. He was doing something that nobody else had done. He invented a type of music in a way. That's fun. And I think that in this day and age, that can exist for 2 reasons. One, as I said, the consolidation of the majors. And the other, I think, is that you have the technology to go in and make a record today and make it for what you made it for 30 years ago with the equipment that you can use. So it's cheaper, which is really important, I think, for this business. It's one thing that really isn't talked about that much, but once things sort of settle, the ability to make records and do it at your own pace, as long as you understand what that means, is fantastic. So I think the future is great because the artist, again, will have control, and the visionaries will have control of the most important element, which is the music. That is the most important thing. The rest of it doesn't really matter. I think it's always the same, no matter what genre. You're always looking for somebody who has vision and somebody who's original and who's not afraid to take chances. They scare you a bit because they're always a bit ahead of you, which is what you want. So you have to, at times, just keep your mouth shut. And other times, if you have the right dialogue and you have the right words, throw it out there. Smart artists will listen. They might not do it, but they'll listen. And if there's a germ of an idea in a bad idea, but part of it that's good, they'll take it and run with it. So my sense was always to try to do that and try to be as supportive as possible and talk to artists who I knew, or who I hoped anyway, were a step ahead of me, that we could take whatever conversation that we would have and run with it and make something better based on that conversation. If I could do that, that was fantastic. And that never changed. I mean, to me, and I've said it before, if you don't have an artist roster that is one step ahead of the record company is going to be in trouble somewhere along the line. We listened, whether it was at Warner's or later on at DreamWorks, when we started DreamWorks, we had an A&R staff that we built, and that was the first thing we did, because it was, in our minds, Mo, myself, and Michael Austin, when we started DreamWorks, the most important thing, have the people who understood music, or at least understood artists, who could be out there finding things that were interesting for us. And we set the standard. We would sit down and have A&R meetings. The A&R meetings were flawed, and I always felt they were sort of impossible. But the philosophy came through in the A&R meeting. So the A&R people understood by hearing us judge other things or hearing our concerns about things that they would bring in, whether it was too much like something else, or wasn't original enough, or whatever the adjectives were that we used. It set a tone for the philosophy of the company, and we tried to have that. Well, what you want is some kind of balance. I couldn't do it all. There's no way. No one person could. So you're always looking for somebody who has a different take, and some people have great sense in certain areas, whether it's pop music or hip hop or whatever. You don't want to be all things to all people, but if you have somebody who's really smart in a particular area and you believe in that person, an A&R person who's creative enough to find something that's really interesting, then you listen, and that's what you look for in building a company. I don't know, because I've been out of it for a while, so I'm not sure what the differences are. I know the size is different. I think there's been a major cutback. And I think the approach is different. Record companies can't spend the kind of money that they spent before because of the shrinking marketplace. And I'm not so sure the marketplace has shrunk as much as sales have shrunk based on other phenomena. But because of that, record companies are, in some ways, maybe smarter because they have certain limitations now. The $500,000 video may be a thing of the past, except for a handful of artists. And how you market a record is now really important because you've got to get a real bang for your buck. So they may be more creative. Who knows? I do know that the pressure is good and bad. The good part is what we just discussed. It makes you really think about what you're doing. The bad part, of course, is that you're dealing in a situation where you're not at ease because you're part of a corporation. And if you're not in the top 2 or 3 echelons of a corporation, you're not treated the same. I saw that at Warner's. I was lucky because when we were at Time Warner, Warner Communications, we were a cash cow, so they loved us. When you walked in, as scary as it was to be in a corporate meeting, you had a lot of interested people, and it turned out always to be much easier and much better than I had imagined, because he scared the living shit out of me. But now it's different. The people that are working at major labels aren't necessarily the #1 guys, and most of the people that have been at major labels are still at major labels understand that they're not the #1 guy anymore. So it makes it difficult, it makes it harder. There's much more pressure, and that's sad. And corporations and creative people are it's always an interesting sort of dynamic that probably isn't really workable. Or if it's workable, it has to be done with the right people, the right corporate people. They really have to understand, and the right creative people too, who have to understand what a corporation is about. So there's that dynamic that needs to sort itself out. I'm not sure if it has or not. But I think what is happening, what potentially can happen based on, again, stuff that we don't know about, technology, and where technology is going to take us. We don't know. We don't know what it's going to mean to major labels or independent labels. I think independent labels right now have a better chance of doing stuff because they can get their stuff out there. They can be heard. There's some artists that have sold some records, and they own it. They own the whole thing, so they can make $10 a record, and if they sell 60,000 records, you can add it up. It's a lot of money. And it's a great thing because it allows artists to make their mistakes and take their time and learn. And ultimately, a major label can get you further, probably. I think that's always been the case because there's more funds. And once the landscape is sorted out, the audience is still there. People love music. What's confusing is that listening to a record isn't the same as it used to be when I was part of the music business. I think that phenomena of sitting down with earphones and or big speakers and hi-fis and stereos and whatever, and sitting and listening to something doesn't exist the way it used to, and that takes some of the excitement away from the music business, because there's so many things going on, and there's so many things going on at the same time. I mean, you watch TV, and if you're watching the news, you've got the news, and then you've got all the stuff that the guy isn't saying below. I have teenage daughters, and when I walk in their room, they're into music. They're listening to music. They're on their computers. They're playing video games. So that's confusing to me because I'm not sure how you sort that out. People still buy records. People still are interested in records, whether they're buying them or stealing them. They want music in their lives. So I think the key thing is what it's always been, and the one thing to stay with, which is quality. If you have a great record, if you have great music, it'll get heard, and somebody will grab it, figure out a way to pay for it, hopefully. And that's the goal, more so than ever before because there's so much competition. The individual has so many things that they can do, DVDs and movies, etc., that it forces, I think, companies and individuals, it will force them to really make sure they're making the best possible music. I think it depends on where you are in your career. I mean, if you're just starting and you can somehow survive doing it on an independent basis or controlling it, it meaning the music, may be a smart way to move or a smart way to go. If you have a major label that hears it and wants it, then you have to make that decision. But you have to be aware of the fact that it's very hard for a major label, based on the economics of the business, to do what we used to do with Neil Young or Prince or others when the record business was different and wonderful, where you didn't have to spend whatever you had to spend. There's a tremendous amount of pressure on labels, and it's very hard for them to stay with an artist. Though they're trying. I think there's a great awareness that that vibe is out there amongst the artist community. And it may not be an organized community, but it's certainly there certainly is an artist community of sorts that major labels don't stick with artists, and I think major labels will try to sort of reverse that perception. But I don't know what to say about it. I mean, it's the individual. If the individual does not want to put it out there in a major way, then maybe controlling it is a great way to start, and realize that it's going to take time and you're going to have to grow as an artist. And maybe growing at your own pace is a better way of doing it. It's a tough question. It really is a tough question. Ultimately, I think that if you're looking to be, an artist with a career, a long-term career, for the most part, major labels are the way to go. Now, there are offshoots of major labels too that are, labels that are owned by major labels but are accepted as being, slightly left of center, whether it's None Such or whatever the label might be, and those are wonderful alternatives depending on the artist. And I know that Geffen or not Geffen, but Interscope is trying, even though Interscope is a major label and acts like a major label in good ways and bad ways, is trying to build some kind of label identity with all the different labels so that you have some diversification. And Warner's is doing the same thing and has done. I mean, that's what we did when we started Reprise many, many years ago. We wanted to be able to differentiate the two labels and also have more focus, where you'd have a handful of artists that had more people working on the record. So from that standpoint, where you have the opportunity to be on a smaller label, but still part of a major label, that's good too. I don't know. There's all sorts of alternatives. And again, the ability to make something that's really good and get it heard today is more doable. The radio isn't quite, look, you still need radio. The world has not changed that much yet. We'll see what happens. Again, we don't know, but we'll see what happens. I'm sure distribution, radio, all the things that were so important to the record industry will be revised in a dramatic way. I really believe that. But how you go about it is a difficult one, because your main focus as an artist or a musician is doing good work. If you can do something that's great, often that takes you to the right place. It'll be discovered or heard, or the obvious. Often you put a record out and a major label will pick it up, and there starts a career. So you can get caught up in the problems of the music business, major labels, independent labels, but there's one constant that does not change, thank goodness. So keep your equilibrium somewhat at bay, and that is quality. If you've got something that's great, it'll get heard. And how you choose to have it heard is, your business. But that's the only way not to get so confused that you just sort of throw up your hands and give up. I wouldn't give up. I would just stay true to what you're doing and make sure you're doing it as good as you can do it. In the entertainment industry, I mean, it's hard. There's schools now. USC has one, music business school. I think there's some. There's one in Miami. I think UCLA might have one now. So I used to say, well, you can't go to school and do this, but that's not quite right. You can go to school. I think as much as you can listen and study, it's important to understand the importance of good music is important. But I have no answers in terms of the, what doors to knock on. I think you just knock on every door. If you're passionate about something, go for it, and be fearless about that.